Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Chilluminati podcast, episode 115. As always, I'm one of your hosts, Mike Martin, joined by my other two co-hosts, Jesse Cox and Alex Fasciane.
Yeah.
The lawmen of the West.
What? The sheriffs.
That's what you are. You're sheriffs of the West.
Nah, I'm criminal. Let's be real.
Crazy.
Oh, okay.
It's just crazy that you're in Texas
I know.
and you're like, you guys are the sheriffs. I'm like, dude, you're like
Listen, dude.
a Texas guy.
There's always,
but
there's always something more west.
That's true. Very true. Also, I mean, I was born and bred in like New England. I'm not really a Texan.
That's
I'm
true.
Like,
I get it.
I'm like a spy.
One of
Yeah.
our presidents was from New England, claimed he was from Texas, and everyone was like, he's Texas. So like you can do whatever
He's
you want.
so
Oh, shit.
Texas.
I'm
Yeah.
Texan, guys. Hello,
There
my
you go.
our
Yeah.
Texas listeners. I am now one of you. Hello, welcome to what is inevitably, hopefully, the part of the Atlantis story that feels a little bit more grounded than our last episode. We'll talk about that in much more detail, though, because something that isn't legend is the benefits you get at Patreon. Isn't that right, Alex?
Yes, you are right about that. And let me tell you something. Patreon, it's great. And I, it's hard for me to tell as one of the three people who directly benefit from this. Not even 3, 5, 6 people who
Six people that benefit from this now. This
who
Patreon.
directly benefit from this, whose meal tickets are on the line. I don't know who the site's better for, honestly, me or you, because we're out here. This is how we get our paychecks. We don't have to worry
right now?
We don't have to be creatively compromised in any way. You know what I mean? We don't have to worry about it because the money's there.
Oh, I'm
that's great for
compromised.
us. But for
By
them
the
at
way.
home who are paying on the Patreon, like I wish I could get mini-sodes of my favorite podcast right after the podcast episode dropped. And I wish that my favorite podcast got all kinds of sick art. And I wish I got free merch, not free merch, but I wish I got sick merch from my favorite podcast before everybody else got, you know what I'm saying? A lot of cool benefits to being on patreon.com/ChilluminatiPod. And I think it's worth heading down there if you've never been there before, just to see how you feel. Try it on, Dressing rooms are open again at department stores. Who doesn't miss that? Who didn't need that? And I'm saying head to patreon.com/ChilluminatiPod and you can just try it on for a side. Try on the figurative Patreon jacket, if you will. Try it on. See how you feel in it. Walk around in it. Imagine if you could get mini-sodes all the time. Back to you in the studio.
I don't know what happened during that pitch, but for some reason I'm on the Patreon website and my pants are missing.
That's what I want from you. That's what I want from everyone. So head down to patreon.com/Chilluminati where you can become part of the Chilluminati family today.
All right. Well, welcome back to the podcast. Everyone who skipped ahead 10 seconds at a time in order to get to this point. Nice of you to join us. Thanks for coming back. You skipped over the ad, but you're here now.
You know what? If you aren't on this page by now,
They're back to skipping. They're skipping again.
I imagined what I
10
heard.
seconds at a time. They're like, boop, boop.
You know what? While you boop, 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 boop.
Yeah.
they're like, is he talking about something else, or is he? And then I'm like, and that's the best part about being on this website. Patreon.com/ChilluminatiPod. Patreon.com/ChilluminatiPod. Patreon.com/ChilluminatiPod.
Whoa.
I'm loving
Thank
it.
you.
That's
you
that's
pissed
my
off at least 2 people.
my new slogan is Patreon.com/ChilluminatiPod. I'm loving it. What do you think of that?
yeah, nobody's ever used that before.
I don't think it's going to catch on.
Patreon.com/ChilluminatiPod. Just do it. How about that?
No, that doesn't make any sense.
Patreon.com/ChilluminatiPod. The happiest place even on earth. What do you think about that? Forget about the pace part. I don't want to get sued by the salsa company, but
Give me an Atlantis themed
New York City. Yeah.
I'm drowning in benefits. And speaking of drowning, Mathis, I think we have a little episode to do.
We do. We have an episode today to do, boys. We do. It is time to now begin the second and final part of the lost city of Atlantis.
Oh, what a shame.
I hope they find it soon.
While last week was filled with facts from ear to ear, divined by those with the gift to interpret trans-dimensional beings on a higher plane whose mission is to educate us so that we may raise our own vibrations on this meager third dimension and raise the collective unconsciousness to the next phase of human spiritual evolution, this week's episode will be taking a decidedly different tone.
Woof.
Well, it's fun.
I don't know. It still seems like we're lying to people, but okay.
No, not today, my man.
Reporting non-factual information as reported isn't the same as lying, okay? Sometimes you got to do that for cultural purposes. That's what we're doing on this show. So we are not experts. We are armchair enthusiasts at best.
That's actually important to point out. Like, we will be touching on a lot of scientific stuff today. So there's little minor aspects of like whatever theory it is that I'm speaking about that I may have gotten wrong. I apologize. I did my best to understand as much of this as I could. But I am not a scientist, surprising nobody. So there's a lot to...
That's truth right there.
I believe in science.
I'm an ufologist, a ufologist.
You are not that either.
Ufologist is such a great name for that too.
Right?
I'm a goofologist.
Nice.
Hey,
hell
that's
yeah.
a good one.
Garsh, am I right?
Listen, while it's fun to hear about the crazy side of Atlantean conspiracy, I posit that the reality of Atlantis is equally as interesting, if not more so. For as much drama as there may be between those who believe in the insane conspiracy of Atlantis and those who want to take a more realistic approach to it, within the scientific world of Atlantis, there exists just as much between those who believe Atlantis was real in some fashion or another, and those who believe any research and searching done for it is an enormous waste of time, energy, and resources, and want nothing more than to leave it behind as a simple story told by Plato.
And for the rest of us, there's Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
And, right. And that was a great game. Great game.
No, garbage game. Sharks. Too many sharks. Far too many sharks.
Jesse, this is a tangent.
Assassin's Creed, the new one, where you play as the hot redheaded chick that I custom made a hot redheaded chick. Much better. No sharks. Zero sharks. Landlocked.
You got to play Subnautica, Jesse. Amazing.
Not only have I played it, that game is a horror game, and anyone who says otherwise is mad.
You know what? It kind of is, though, right? Like, for real?
No, it absolutely has horror tones and horror aspects. The dark parts of the sea and the distant roars of the creatures.
No, that shit's too much for me. That's the worst game ever made. Whoever made that game, terrible person.
Let me pull you into the sea of Atlantis with me right now, Jesse.
Oh, you definitely know they got Atlantean monsters down there.
Oh, 100%.
No, thank you.
And so while some of the scientists who want to leave the story behind might be right, it would be no fun to completely ignore the interesting signs and ruins that maybe, just maybe, Atlantis was real in some fashion. Now, last week I said that there was some precedent for using ancient texts and old tales to find lost cities once believed to be a legend, like the city of Troy. However, I also said that there was a notable difference between something like Troy and Atlantis. And while, yes, Atlantis is mentioned in an ancient text with a surprising amount of detail, Plato's stories are the only place that you can see Atlantis directly referenced, while Troy had been mentioned multiple times outside of the original stories as well. Mentionings of it being a trading city and so on randomly through ancient texts gave enough credence to the belief that it was real, and through cross-referencing texts, they were able to pinpoint where they believed and were correct about the city of Troy's location. So, without all that in mind, I'll be breaking this episode down into kind of two parts. Atlantis if it were a real place, and Atlantis if it were a reference to a real place. By the end, maybe you'll have an idea as to why this topic is so frustrating for some, an endless source of mystery for others. Before we dive too deep into these two sections, we have to begin with what Plato exactly wrote about in his two works, the Timaeus and the Cretius. It would be impossible, obviously, for me to cover all of it, but I'll give you the best summary of it that I possibly can. First, it's a very common belief that this story is about someone telling Plato about Atlantis, that Plato himself got the story more or less first or second hand. However, there's actually zero evidence behind this, as the story of Timaeus and Cretius is about a story of a story. In itself, the narrator is already unreliable. It starts with Socrates, surrounded by Timaeus, Cretius, and Hermocrates, is I believe how you say that name.
Hermocrates.
Hermocrates is like what my brain so desperately wants to say. It sets the scene by reminding everyone that Socrates sets the scene by reminding the three people that are with him that the previous day he had given a speech on the ideal city, a reference to his Plato's work, The Republic. he asks his three companions to each tell a story to illustrate his idea of a perfect city. Hermocrates suggests that Cretius should start, and he does by saying his tale is, quote, a very strange one, but even so, every word of it is true. Immediately, the book we're reading by Plato tells of someone else who knows Socrates well. And this particular story is getting the story secondhand from someone else, Cretius. So Cretius continues that the story comes from his very old grandfather, who he had heard it from his father before him. So his great grandfather is the original source.
And he swore by his tattoo.
And it kind of gets that weird, actually. You'll see. This man was a man by the name of Solon, and he claims that Solon was unimpeachable, not capable of telling a lie. Solon, in real life, Solon is actually Plato's great-great-great-great-grandfather. So Solon was a real person that's brought up in the story.
But like 500 years before?
Yeah, he is directly related to Plato, but he's from way back. The story goes that Solon visited Egypt, specifically the city of Sai. One day, while speaking with his hosts, Solon began to speak to an Egyptian priest about Greek's marvelous antiquity, but was quickly interrupted by the priest saying, quote, "O Solon, Solon, you Greeks are never anything but children, and there is not an old man among you," end quote. He continues to explain in the story that Greek was once the greatest existence the world had ever known, but the Greeks had been wiped out by floods and fire repeatedly over millennia. Before the greatest of all floods completely wiped them out, the laws and military deeds of Athens had been the greatest ever known. But that it was in the far distant past, and according to this Egyptian priest, that's over 9,000 years ago. And this is at the time of Solon, which was Plato's great-great-great-great-grandfather. So you're looking at 9,000 years ago from that point. The greatest Athenian deed of all, according to the Egyptian priest, was its halting of the great sea power, Atlantis. Atlantis had ravaged Europe and Asia, and its empire was larger than Libya and Asia combined. This vast empire was located somewhere in the endless Atlantic Sea, in front of the straits of the Greeks called the Pillars of Heracles. They sought to conquer and enslave Egypt, Greece, and all countries in the Mediterranean, but the Athenians, deserted by their allies and alone in this war, fought and defeated the invaders and freed all those within the boundaries of Heracles. Shortly thereafter, a large earthquake and flood not only destroyed Athens, but also sunk Atlantis within the same 24 hours, creating impassable and impenetrable terrain of mud.
Don't you hate when that happens?
Yeah, you gotta absolutely hate when that happens. Obviously, as well, just to kind of interject, I am also summing down to the best of my ability an enormously long story with lots of details. But all of this is like kind of just the general point of the story. To say that the narrator at this point is unreliable would be an understatement. The story, if this particular telling is true, would have had to pass through 6 generations of people completely error-free to be remotely reliable. It doesn't help that in the following book called Cretius, Plato also contradicts himself. In the first book, Cretius, the speaker, the first book's name's Timaeus, but Cretius is speaking in both. In the first book, Cretius claims that he is speaking purely from memory and that he laid awake all night the night before to ensure that he did not forget a single detail. However, in the second book, yeah, it's insane. It's like that feels like your brain would just start making up memories in a desperate attempt to not forget something.
Maybe I just don't remember what it's like to not have a computer, and like it's way easier to do that than it is for me to do that right now. But I don't know.
My cat Ollie is my whole life. He's my best friend, and I've had him now for over 10 years, which is nuts to me. But the fact that I've had him so long and I love him so much means I want what's best for him. And oddly, I can do better in litter. And I do, now with Pretty Litter. Thanks to Pretty Litter for sponsoring this episode. Pretty Litter is kitty litter completely reinvented. Unlike a regular traditional litter, Pretty Litter's super light crystals not only trap odor and release moisture, resulting in dry, low-maintenance litter that doesn't smell, but it also is virtually dust-free because it's manufactured with a specialized de-dusting process. Less dust, no fuss. Yeah, it's a nice line, isn't it? Yeah, that's what I thought too. Pretty litter arrives safely at my door in a small, lightweight bag that lasts up to a month. Now that I get litter bags auto-shipped, I don't have to deal with the last-minute trips to the store, and shipping is completely free. But the real reason I want people to check out Pretty Litter is because of its ability to help you monitor your cat's health. Pretty Litter monitors my cat's health by changing colors when it detects potential underlying issues. You won't find that in any other conventional litter. So get the world's smartest litter without leaving home by visiting prettylitter.com and using our promo code CHILL for 20% off your first order. That's prettylitter.com, promo code CHILL for 20% off. prettylitter.com, promo code CHILL. But in the second book, Cretius claims that he has Solon's notes and that he is speaking from the notes themselves. So immediately within his two works, Plato just contradicts himself instantly. One, it's a memory. One, it's notes. We don't have the notes, so we don't know if the notes ever existed. But the fact that he rewrote the story, kind of rewrote it in a different way in the second book, already kind of points to this Plato being maybe making something up. But even if we take the second story as true, that he did have the notes, we then have to believe that Solon didn't mistranslate or misunderstand any Egyptian when he was writing it in Greek, and that the priest was also 100% reliable and wasn't himself passing along a story that he may have been told. All that to say that the one and only source of reference of Atlantis is Plato, and even then, it's horribly unreliable. And the final point in this kind of preface is that all of this is also completely neglecting the context in which these two books were written. Plato at this point was kind of getting old, and before his life came to an end, he essentially was attempting to write theories on everything. He was literally trying to explain as much of the world, life, heaven, space, time that he possibly could, and his final works, Cretius, Timaeus, and so on, were his giant stabs in the dark, trying for him to kind of like put together what he believed to be a perfect world, how creation happened, etc., etc. It really was a final thought experiment for one of the greatest philosophers to ever exist. To say these books are written as historical fact would just be contextually incorrect. So that is important moving into this. There's a whole lot more, obviously, in these books about not just Atlantis, but everything. And that's the important bit. For any and all Atlantis hunters and Atlantis curious, it's essentially to know where Atlantis even comes from historically. So, with all that laid, if Atlantis was real, where is it and what happened? So the first set of places that I'm going to cover are places that still exist today. Places that, if they were Atlantis, changed over time, perhaps weren't even named Atlantis to begin with, and were simply a civilization that had grown to become a legend over the course of generations, and then eventually kind of turned into Atlantis.
Like Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah.
That's where Atlantis is. We've known it this whole time.
Hey, right? Atlanta. Dude, that is like one of the best Futurama jokes of all time. Is when they
I've only seen a couple episodes of that show.
They get Donovan to like do his Atlantis song, but he does it about Atlanta, and it's just
That's
incredible.
actually great.
Yeah.
Going into this too, another preface is even the researchers within this are constantly arguing with each other. Everybody seems to have their own pet theory, their own cherry-picked facts to certain areas as to why they believe they're right. So very similar to the UFO world, the Atlantis world of those who are genuinely trying to like use history to research it are filled with people who constantly kind of nitpick at each other's own theories, and there's not really a unifying belief here. So moving forward, understand that this is kind of an amalgamation of 10s to 20s of people's different beliefs and research and shit, kind of chiseled down to what I consider the best possible theories. So, sorry, there's a lot of preface here, but it's important to distinguish last episode and this episode and what kind of to expect going forward. So, places that if they were Atlantis that changed over time, there are a few such places that hold the most evidence for that today. And the first that we're going to cover are the Malta Islands. Though relatively small in size now, it's far from impossible that Malta thousands of years ago was a much larger landmass. We also know that somewhere between 3500 and 2500 BC, the Mediterranean's oldest known temple building civilizations lived right in the Maltese archipelago, predating the Great Pyramids of even Egypt. Have any of you ever like seen Malta Island pictures or ever been in that area?
I mean, I know what Malta is. I've never seen, especially not ruins in the context of like temples on Malta. I don't know, but I'm aware of Malta.
Yeah, it's like it's like south of Sicily.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, yes, it's very close to Italy. Yeah, it's well, we're going to talk about that actually.
I have a thought. Oh, go for it. Yeah.
I was just gonna say it probably seemed a lot more exotic in a like non-globalized world, right?
Sure. Yeah, I can see that.
But you have to imagine, like, during this time, I don't feel like we give the Greeks and Italians and, like the Egypt, like the Mediterranean wasn't navigable. Like, they got around. Like, it wasn't like it was a huge, I mean, it's still a massive ocean, like it's a sea, but like they got around. It wasn't too crazy. I'm curious what they're going to say, because literally he said in what you stated earlier that he literally was like the Pillars of Hercules, I think is what he said.
Yes.
That's literally the Straits of Gibraltar. That's like a known commodity.
So we'll talk a little bit about that, but that's actually an interesting point, because according to different people who are searching, the Pillars of Hercules are maybe 2 or 3 different areas. They're not necessarily the Straits of Gibraltar. I personally believe you.
Literally, that's what it's known as
because of
in
where
history.
they're located, where Plato was, like the Straits of Gibraltar.
Gateway to the Atlantic Ocean. Like,
yes,
it makes it 100%. Checks out.
But if you just move certain details around, you can have a whole other thing.
Yeah, I got into this recently on some episode that we were talking about antiquity, but like it's a double-edged sword, because you think about movies like Hercules, the Disney Hercules, or something like that, where they're kind of like just mapping current society onto ancient Greece or whatever. And you're like, that's crazy. There's no way it was like that. That's like such a just comedy version of what it was like. And then you actually look at the ruins and you look at how society ran at that time, and you're like, no, like, so they call it civilization for a reason. Like, we all kind of end up like people who live in a city now and people who lived in a city in ancient Greece. Like, there's a lot that's the same between the two lifestyles. But at the same time, a lot of the things that we rely on in our life today, like internet or something like that, things that give us like hard, fast definitions and answers. Yep. Like, that's the big difference between now and then, is that like the information wasn't like verified. It wasn't like whatever. So things like, the Pillar of Hercules, obviously that's Gibraltar, which again, I agree with what Jesse's saying 100%, but oh my God.
What's funny too is like Alex's picture is frozen, so we just hear like noise happening.
My my little like thing that's attached to my microphone is like, for some reason the wire is like around my feet. But the thing that I'm saying is like, it makes things so much less provable. And so multiples of things things like you think about today, like who started the French dip, right? And there's like 2 places in LA that are like, we're the place that started the French dip, right? And the only reason that any argument is ever put to rest nowadays because we have it written down. But like back then in ancient Greece, if there was like 50 places that were like the original they would all, like, everybody would believe all of them, because you would never even probably see the other ones.
There's also the interesting historical, I don't even know what you would call this, but the idea that the Straits of Gibraltar being called the Pillars of Hercules, is it one of those things where it was mentioned by Plato and then they named it afterwards, and it's only been 2,000 some years, so we just like, oh well, that's what it is. But at the time they named, like, it's named because it represents what was already written down. You honestly do not know. It seems like it's an impossibility to know. Also, way off topic. No, go for it. Sorry.
No. I was just what are we going to say? Go ahead.
What's off topic? I was going to talk about, Alex mentioned the fact, this is way off topic, but I have to bring this up. If you are interested in like ancient societies and how they ran, and like, so there's a YouTube channel where this guy is a chef and he makes ancient Roman food.
That's really interesting.
Cool. And so one of the things he did is he made ancient Roman French fries. And he's like, all right, Rome Europe did not have potatoes. That's from the New World. So what they used are like tubers and shit, and they would like cut them into fry shapes. And then the ketchup, because they didn't have ketchup, what they would make was basically like a wine version of HP sauce.
That's great, actually.
And so he was like, yeah, I made it. It's delicious. And I was like, I love that they were like, yeah, no, they would they like definitely had fish and chips. Like, be aware.
The Romans fucking had fry carts too. Like, that's so funny to me.
Yeah.
Just like we've said this on the show countless times, but humans have always been humans. And and like even the graffiti is some of my favorite shit of like ancient Rome graffiti and Greece graffiti. It's
Cops
like
suck. Yeah,
like somebody sucked somebody's cock, or I was here, like that kind of shit that we write today. It's all the same.
I love and this is again super off topic in Star Trek when someone's like, it's years and years and years in the future, and someone's like, I could use a hot fudge sundae. I always thought that was super endearing because it's like, yeah, you know what? I'm in space. It's a mess. I could use a hot fudge sundae. I'm like, that sounds exactly like how it would be.
The thing that blew my mind was when I was at the Getty Villa and I saw I think I used this exact same example last time, but it was like a guy who makes coffins. And one of the coffins is like open there to be at his shop and it has like ads on it for like deals for the coffins. And I'm like, this is like a fucking smog shop. This is like a fucking shop up the street, like a body shop up the street. Like it's the same shit. There were like many of them in the town. We all had like, there's probably like Yelp even like on the like fucking, what do you call those things where they post bills and shit?
And for a fact, the coffin dude also made the best coffee table and he helped with your fence. Oh yeah, for sure.
I love it. Yeah. Ancient civilization. Like if you're ever going to look at Atlantis, you're going to be forced to go into Greek's ancient history. And it's so fun and it's so fascinating. Like Greek had like this period of literacy and then had a period of like a re-dark age where they know like the whole society could no longer read or write for a few hundred years. And then they became literate again. Like it's fascinating, like what these ancient civilizations went through.
Yeah, and definitely not us right now, right? Definitely not us getting super literate in the internet age, right? Somehow.
Oh, God. In the information age. All right, moving forward. All right. So continuing with Malta, it also wouldn't be far-fetched to think that the islands over time went through massive natural disasters over the many generations that would perhaps tick off the box of a flood wiping out the ancient civilization of Atlantis.
Is Malta known to have had a huge natural disaster?
I think it was affected by, none that matter, like specifically to Malta being a convincing place beyond a few cherry picked facts.
None that matter.
Out of the area that we're going to,
none that matter.
The things that we're going to talk about, I think Malta is my least likely to be the place. But none that were kind of like brought up in my research immediately. There is a few that are going to come up later for other places though. The Maltese Islands also have matching colors on its beaches. If you remember last episode, we talked about the Atlantis having white, red, and black rock, and Malta matches that. But perhaps its biggest argument that Malta is indeed the place that Atlantis once rested is the infamous Malta cart ruts. Do any of you know what the Malta cart ruts are?
Are these the things off the coast that are like underwater?
Yes, there are a few. So yeah, basically, the Malta cart ruts are pretty much as described. Small indentations in the soft limestone on the island that can be found between the main island and some of its satellite ones. They can be found running between temples as well as running directly into the ocean itself. Most believe that these are, as you probably would have guessed for yourselves, evidence of trading or moving materials, building materials, and whatnot across its civilization and the different islands, perhaps even bringing offerings to temples. You can actually see some pictures of them. I will throw a picture or two in Twitter right now for you.
I mean, it's pretty
straightforward.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I don't know if it means Atlantis, but it definitely means that at some point in the history of this island, like it was probably one whole island instead of three, like one big island, one medium island, one baby island, right? Like at one point, it's probably a whole thing. And then, disaster.
Yep, I agree. I sent you a picture of what they look like just so you have them, but they're pretty much what you expect them to be.
Yeah, it's super interesting.
Yeah, they're around 4,000 years old to be believed. And the more they traverse through the soft limestone, the more that particularly became ingrained. So it's likely these were regular paths that people traveled constantly. and they were pretty straight lines. However, those who believe Malta may have very well been Atlantis believe that there's something else. If you remember in the first episode, I described Atlantis in great detail thanks to Plato's incredibly detailed description, with its concentric circles, canals, bridges, and so on. Some believe that these cart ruts are actually evidence of early irrigation systems being put into place, that these were the systems specifically used by the Atlanteans themselves, but not calling themselves Atlantis at the time, of course. That's the biggest kind of like physical evidence that Malta has.
That is super, like it is 100% like where a cart went multiple times.
Yeah.
There isn't like, it was irrigation. That's not how irrigation worked then or in the past. Like that just is
But
uneducated.
if I brought you there in the year 1100 and I showed that shit to you and there was no way to cross check it.
If that was the irrigation, the people who live there would be like, we've done a terrible job. Like there's no
right. I just mean if you were like a dumb person from back then who didn't have access to the internet and I was like, that was Atlantis. Look at that. Wouldn't you be like, whoa, that's
holy
crazy.
Shit.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, if I was an idiot, yes, absolutely. You're right.
Because I think about that. Well, like if you don't have the internet, you didn't have like an education like you had today. Like I just, I think about that all the time. That like mummies were like fraudulent mummies were like a thing like in ancient Egypt. You know what I mean? Because they were already old. Like just think about it in those contexts, like tricking somebody about an ancient civilization.
They found that back then, though. Like my assumption was that Plato's story was like a tale, like an allegory about, because the whole point of the books was like why Athens is like a great ass place to be. And he was hyping up Athens. And the whole point is like there was this big empire and they were all a bunch of pieces of shit. They were so awful that the gods literally smote them. And Athens, who was like the beacon of free society, kicked their ass. And that was the moral of the story.
It's a tale as old as time. It's fucking Star Wars. It's the evil empire taking over the galaxy and the rebel state of Athens all alone, fighting them back.
It's like the guy who didn't drink his milk having his arms come off. It's just like a cautionary tale. You know what I mean? It's like, don't be like this stupid ass people. You know what I mean?
If we're going to talk about places in Malta, I want everyone to know, this is very important. To this day, you can even go there. They have a complete and totally walk-aroundable set from the movie Popeye. That old ass movie Popeye, Robin Williams Popeye.
Yeah, the soundtrack to Popeye the movie, so good.
The city still exists. The city they built for the movie. You can literally go there. It is an attraction. It has 5 stars, 15,000 reviews, 5 stars. The people love it.
I'm down. We should go one day, boys. I'd be down.
If I went to Malta, I would be drunk and
I don't want to do
the entire time.
I don't want to do any plans. I just
we didn't do any work.
I'm going to Malta. I'm going to eat some sausages. I'm going to nap.
Yeah, let's do it.
Go find a weird goat somewhere, and they're like,
I read an article.
To eat it, you must kill it. Like,
I read an article that said that every hot dog that you eat takes 36 minutes off your life. Did you hear about that?
Wait, what? Every what?
Every hot dog that you eat, like some other foods add minutes to your life
or something.
It's just a real bad. Just a real bad one.
Corn dogs like a week.
Yeah, well, hopefully you're eating some other stuff to add those minutes back.
Well, yeah. I'm eating healthy stuff. Tonight was Brussels sprouts and chicken.
There you go.
Yeah.
See?
All right. So now we're getting to the point where Malta isn't necessarily the right place. There's some debatable evidence that Malta may be in the big stretch. It could be Atlantis. But here's the evidence that kind of goes against it. First, as Jesse brought up, are the Pillars of Heracles. While there's no consensus on exactly where the pillars lie, the majority believe that it's the Straits of Gibraltar. But there's
which would make sense,
which would make a whole lot of sense, especially in context of the story in Plato's life. But there seems to be a debate about everything when it comes to Atlantis, even amongst those who are truly searching for it. And the closest place that could be considered the pillars is too far away from it to be the same one as spoken in Plato's works. It just doesn't fit.
Oh, you mean from Malta?
Yeah, from Malta. Right. It just does not fit for Malta. Additionally, there are mentions of mountains around Atlantis. However, the closest mountain to Malta is Mount Etna in Sicily. Maybe, perhaps at some point, Malta was connected to the boot of Italy before the eons before it separated waters rose. But even then, it wouldn't be surrounded by majestic mountains as Plato suggested. Now, granted, there is debate that the word he used, which is montes, Montes, can be translated into hills. But even then, there's not enough there to suggest that Malta was surrounded by these glorious quote unquote hills. Thanks to Magic Spoon for sponsoring this episode. And let's be real, we all love Magic Spoon here at Chilluminati. You've heard me talk about how I've been changing my dietary plans and the big move across the country, and Magic Spoon has now been a very steady and stable part of that diet change. And it has done wonders for me to replace that sugary craving for sugary cereal in the morning and to still be able to get that taste without any of the attachments that come along with it. Instead, Magic Spoon has 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and only 4 net grams of carbs in each serving. There's only 140 calories a serving, and it's also a keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and low-carb breakfast choice. You can build your own box or get a variety pack with the available flavors cocoa, fruity, frosted, peanut butter, blueberry, and cinnamon, and now they're bringing back 2 popular flavors, cookies and cream and maple waffle, this time permanently. So you guys know we love it here, and I would urge you guys to go check out Magic Spoon if you're looking to eat a little bit better. Go to magicspoon.com/chill to grab your delicious cereal and try it today. And be sure to use our promo code CHILL to check out and save $5 on your order, as well as support the podcast. Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't even like it for some reason, they'll refund you your money with 0 questions asked. Remember, get your next delicious bowl of guilt-free cereal at magicspoon.com/chill using promo code CHILL. So while it's fun to think about, perhaps Malta is not the most convincing theory overall. With very little to no physical evidence at its disposal, it requires a lot of stretches to connect. But there are, in my opinion, some better matches. Perhaps one of the best ones isn't a civilization that exists anymore, but did at one point exist. An ancient civilization discovered in 1900, that of Crete, specifically the discovery of the city of Knossos. If this sounds familiar, it's because it was beneath the palace of Knossos that King Minos had created the inescapable labyrinth that the half-man, half-bull, the legendary Minotaur, would be put.
If you're looking also, it up, it's Knossos. Think of it that
Knossos?
Way. No, yeah, it's Gnosis, but like
it's Gnosis
with a K.
Oh yeah, with a K. It's Gnosis with a K. Yeah, silent
if you're looking
K.
it up, yeah.
This is also important with the Minotaur because the legend behind the Minotaur also ties in with Atlantis. Poseidon had slept with King Minos' wife.
Oh yeah, it's his son. Yeah,
it's his son. The Minotaur is Poseidon's son. And so that was placed under this giant palace, and that's where he would be let loose. And again, Poseidon is the one. Yeah, remember, Poseidon is the one that created Atlantis in the mythos that Plato put forward that we talked about last episode. Now, what was once legend, much like Troy, ended up being truth. The excavation of the Isle of Crete began March 23rd, 1900. And through its vast efforts, the large Palace of Knossos would be discovered. And within, a plethora of ancient knowledge, treasures, and maybe even a hint that Atlantis wasn't really Atlantis, but Atlantis was a reference to Crete. The building itself was huge, comprising of hundreds of rooms. This is the palace that sat in the center, comprising of hundreds of rooms, and within those rooms, fragments of large wall paintings could be found, as well as large urns, a sophisticated plumbing system, more tablets inscribed with an unknown language at the time, chambers decorated with frescoes of griffins, all anchored by a carved gypsum chair that they eventually dubbed the throne room. Moreover, the theme of the bull seemed to be fucking everywhere. Engraved into gemstones, gold signets, and ceremonial bulls' head-shaped vessels known as rhytons, and in dramatic frescoes that covered the palace wall. One of the most famous being the bull leaping fresco. This shows a single bull and 3 youths, a woman at the front, the back, and a young male leaping over the bull with them in between, kind of this weird bull leapfrog. And some believe that was maybe a fun game that the kids played back then, which seems horrendously dangerous, but who knows? There were images of Minoans capturing wild bulls, and some displaying wild bulls walking through the large palace openly, just as described in Plato's story of Atlantis, where they hunted wild bulls with staves and nooses. It's important to note that the Minoans in the pictures were hunting wild bulls represented with giant nets. In addition, we are also near certain that there was some form of relationship between the Isle of Crete and Egypt, as Minoan pottery had also been found in Egypt, while images of long-haired visitors wearing loincloths, bearing gifts, which was a typical signifier of the Cretans, were found in tomb paintings at the Theban necropolis, which may lead credence to the idea that the story of Atlantis came from a priest in Egypt, perhaps mistranslated or perhaps bore from a kernel of truth from the Isle of Crete that blossomed into this fantastic story over generations.
Yeah, maybe just didn't know the name of it. It could be that simple.
Or telephone over the course of time, or this real story got just turned into this kind of legend to teach kids, a certain lesson, et cetera, et cetera. Now, as for the natural disaster that destroyed this island in the city, well, we have something that might have done that. An eruption of Mount Thera, only about 70 miles away from Crete, did happen. An explosion that some scholars posit was 4 times more powerful than the eruption of Krakatoa. And that after exploding, would have sent huge chunks of earth into the ocean and sent enormous waves and earthquakes, essentially, quote, sinking the Isle of Crete and wiping out the majority of its civilization, becoming just a story to the Egyptians in the future, creating the Atlantis legend that we know today. So that's kind of in like a lot of the main like places to look. This is the one I would posit, at least out of what we know today. If Atlantis was a reference to a real place in some point in the story's journey through the history, I can definitely see it being something like the Isle of Crete, something that wasn't actually Atlantis, but eventually became Atlantis over time.
It is close to Athens, close enough where they could have had like an actual war, right? Because when you look at Athens and compare, and you talk about like, all right, well, in the history of ancient Greece, you have like, oh, well, Troy would have been on the edge of what you consider Turkey, right? Yep. And, Athens is right there on the water in that whole area they would travel back and forth on. And, Sparta is like further down and you can see how they would fight. And then Crete is sort of at the southern tip of what you would consider most of Greece and right in between Turkey and Greece. And then like just looking at the map, there are all those little islands. Yep. And you have to imagine maybe there was more connection in the past. And we all know that during different time periods, there were land bridges and things in places that are not land bridges now. So like, for a story, it kind of feels sciencey. Is it real? Who knows? But like, if you look at a map, you can see, oh, maybe. Okay.
Yeah, there's enough there that, granted, they could just be coincidences, but there's enough there where it kind of sits in the right place. It's not too far from places. You're like, okay, maybe at some point.
But it's not fantastical. It is the most like down to earth version of the story. That's like, 100%. There was just like a seafaring group of people and they were tough. And then a calamity occurred and that was like it.
We're out of the Atlantis fantasy world, Jesse. We left that behind. I promise.
But the idea of Atlantis being in the Atlantic and then the people of Athens being like, enough of this bullshit. That seems like a huge stretch. And considering like what goes on in the Atlantic, where would that even be?
Yep.
So
we don't know. So we got one more place that I want to look at before we move into one last kind of topic on this episode. The last physical place that actually exists, the final actual place that Atlantis could be that we'll be covering, is none other than back in Greece, specifically Santorini. Surrounding it, beneath its waters, were undeniably circle-like formations that would fit the description Plato had put forward, which initially sparked interest in the potential connection to Atlantis. As the archaeologists began to survey the area, they came across an ash-covered field near the fishing village of Akrotiri, that's Akrotiri, where they saw something beneath the landscape that intrigued them. The archaeologists then directed their team to dig in that location, and the laborers almost instantly began to recover Minoan-style architecture, and pottery. After 6 days of digging, they found large storage jars filled with remnants of wine and oil, kitchen utensils, loom weights, animal bones, frescoes, stone walls, and holes where disintegrated wooden beams had once held up 2- and 3-story buildings. What was initially this initial search wasn't actually for Atlantis, but a lost city called Helike. But now, because of the discovery of these Minoan artifacts, it suddenly became connected to the Atlantis mythology. The theory is that this little area, this specific part in Greece, might be quote unquote proto-Atlantis, the place that existed before the Isle of Crete had been taken and had this huge palace built on it. That this is maybe where they originated from and then moved out into the sea and then ended up colonizing or what have you, the Isle of Crete later. That's all that exists in Santorini in terms of physical evidence that this is the place that it was. There is similar looking rock. There's the red, the black, the white rock. All places kind of have that. And there's the ringed structures under the water. But there's not much more than that because the ring structures, quote unquote, they're not structures, but the ring formations under the water don't fit perfectly with how they're supposed to be in Plato's story. And so immediately there's already people who are not entirely sure.
If that was the only sticking point, I would be like,
yeah.
Oh, maybe this is it. But I mean,
but there's a lot. Yeah.
It is an interesting island, and that it is like the ring of a caldera of a volcano. Like it's Certainly. Very obvious this thing is like underneath that is a hole where something exploded at some point.
Yep.
Which is neat. And anyone who is interested in Santorini, just, every image you've probably seen of Greece where it's like houses on a cliff and it looks beautiful.
That's what it is.
It's pretty much it. Yeah. Or if you play Overwatch.
Oh, that
the Greek level in Overwatch is literally that.
Yep. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. So gorgeous.
Yeah.
But that wraps up our quick look at the 3 physical places that exist still today that have any evidence that they may have been a city that could have been Atlantis at some point. The next step we want to go into is that it was a potential. So the last things we want to talk about before we go into the last big theory is that there's also a theory that Atlantis was also in reference to a semi-mythical city called Tartessos. Have you heard of Tartessos before?
No, never.
Okay, cool. So Tartessos is a semi-mythical harbor city. Tartessos, Tartessos. It's a semi-mythical harbor city in the surrounding culture on the north coast of the Iberian Peninsula at the mouth of the Guadalquivir River. I'm just giving you a quick wiki explanation of what this place is supposedly. It appears in sources that from Greece and all the Near East starting during the first millennium BC. Herodotus, for example, describes it as beyond the Pillars of Heracles. Again, one of the bigger pieces of evidence that it was Atlantis. Roman authors tend to echo the earlier Greek sources, but from around the end of the millennium, there are indications that the name Tartessos had fallen out of use, and the city may have been lost to flooding. Through several authors attempt to identify it with cities of other names in the area. So the idea is that the history of Tartessos, since it has been referenced in multiple pieces by multiple authors, much like Troy, very much likely existed in some form. And since it fits a lot of what Plato described as Atlantis in terms of, kind of hitting all the check boxes, being near the Pillars of Heracles, being wiped out by a flood, being a trading city near the port, and a great water peoples, they believe that maybe Atlantis was actually just Plato taking Tartessos, renaming it for the purposes of his story, and just kind of repackaging it into his tale that he was telling in that moment.
So wait,
just kind of like to freshen it up.
It would be
more or
Spain? Is that what you're saying?
It's over. You can actually show you a picture of where it is. Hang on, I'll give you a quick look, a quick clip.
And why does it say semi-mythical?
Because it hasn't been discovered yet.
But people just wrote about it and they said that's the location.
There's a ton of people who wrote about it, multiple authors, Romans referenced it as well. There's references through it through all of ancient history. However, it's also very possible that it got wiped out by a flood at some point and what remains of the city are buried underwater where we can't get to them yet. There's a picture of a map where they believe it likely to be somewhere around there.
Interesting.
And the final kind of, you just kind of like looking through.
There is like water kind of where, like there's like a inlet of water.
Yeah,
Lacus Ligustinus.
Yeah,
again, the idea is that it wasn't a separate full island, and that Atlantis was actually just a port city, like a port place that got wiped out by a flood, and then Plato just kind of sprinkled some white lies, renamed
magic.
it.
Yeah.
A little embellishment. Yeah,
exactly. Literally just some embellishment and moved on. Some less credible stuff. There people believe that the Antarctic is actually Atlantis, and that at some point thousands of years ago, Earth wasn't in the position that it was, and that the poles were actually more along the equator at that point, and then slowly over time, the Earth kind of like tilted, and the Arctic became the extreme north and south of the planet and got cold, and that the actual Atlantis is maybe one of those. What evidence they have of that is extremely small to basically non-existent. So we're going to move on now to the very final thing, the thing that people have reached out to me the most about between this week and last week, a thing by the name of the Richat structure. Do you know what the Richat structure is, gentlemen?
Is this the one off the coast of Florida?
No, this is in the Sahara Desert.
Oh, okay. All right, let's go.
Is this the thing that? So I think I know what this is. So there is. Okay. I have no idea if I'm correct in this, but it looks like if you're like looking from above, like a satellite image in the desert, it looks like either a meteor impact or something, but it literally looks like it has the concentric rings.
Yep.
But it's made out of dirt in the desert.
Yep. 100. This is exactly what we're talking about. Some people came forward and was like, this is like a new thing that people have discovered. Unfortunately, for those people who believe it's new, it kind of picked up popularity again in 2018, around the time a couple videos were released that really hyped this place up. However, the Richat structure has been known, it's existed and knows what it's been about since 1965. Countless videos, articles, theories ranging from aliens to natural happenings surround the Richat structure, and I can see why it's so intriguing. This structure, initially discovered in 65, is an enormous bullseye, also known as the Eye of the Sahara. What's so intriguing about it is twofold. On the scientific side, it's still somewhat of a mystery. What was initially thought to be an impact crater was found to have too little melted rock around it for that to be the case. And on the Atlantis side, it contains concentric circles similar to those spoken about in Plato's tale. However, just because something is still a mystery to science doesn't automatically make it proof that it's a fact in a conspiracy. That's important to knowing going into this. This theory essentially is a conspiracy theorist's starting package. It gathers together lots of circumstantial evidence, blows out its important and emphasizes certain aspects, and goes on to ignore anything that doesn't fit. And most importantly to any conspiracy theory, ignores all genuine scholarship to create the illusion that you're onto something. The idea is to create enough smoke to convince yourself and others that there is definitely a fire. The argument is essentially that the Richat structure, or the Eye of the Sahara, fits Plato's description of Atlantis so well, it essentially amounts to proof.
Right.
The biggest piece of provided evidence is that the Eye of the Sahara is a series of concentric rings that precisely matches Plato's description of Atlantis. Unfortunately, the only simple fact that is both are concentric rings, which is not unlikely at all to happen naturally in nature. They do not match up with Atlantis's map provided by Plato, and this is a great example of interpreting a general similarity following basic geometry as if it were a specific match. Concentric rings are not uncommon in nature, as there are several natural processes that can create them. Impact craters obviously are one of them, but this Richat structure is not an impact crater. It is an eroded dome of magma. While the theory admits that it is a natural structure, it gets around this massive problem by simply claiming that the Atlanteans built their city into the natural formation of the rings.
That's what I would do if I found this perfect...
It's the perfect Minecraft tactic.
Exactly.
Yes, I'm saying. The theory further has to use some creative imagination to argue that the Richat structure, if it were fed by rivers and therefore filled with water, would have 2 rings of land and 3 rings of water. But that is not remotely obvious at all. The rings are not discrete, not complete in places, and it's unclear how water would fill the structure if you were to fill water. You could count 4 rings of water if you look at the structure as a whole in a particular way. And while the return argument is it is impossible to know how the structure may have looked hundreds or thousands of years ago, you have to keep in mind that same argument can then be mirrored back at you. When it comes to trying to figure out what's right for you in auto or home insurance and what rates are best, it's really hard to figure that out. But there is a way to figure out the cheapest, best option for you. And there's only one company that does it. Get a better insurance with Gabi. And I know because I literally used it a few times. Gabi is the one true comparison platform with fast, verifiable quotes, not ballpark guesses. Use your current policy to find a better policy comparing your current coverage with up to 40 of the top insurance providers like Progressive, Nationwide, and Travelers, all in a single place. Use your current insurance information to get started, and it's free, and they'll only show policies that are the same or better than your current coverage, many of them at a lower price. A few months ago when I first used Gabi, I wanted to double check and make sure I had the best prices, and I did. And I checked in again last week because it's been a couple months and, at least for me, it still holds true. But it's nice to have Gabi there to assure me of that. Gabi customers save $961 per year on the average, and they'll never sell your information. So you're never going to get those annoying spam or robocalls. Put your policy to the test like I did. Get a better insurance with Gabi. It's totally free to check out, and there is zero obligation. Go to gabi.com/chill. That's GABI.com/chill. Gabi.com/chill. The evidence leans in favor of science, not that of conspiracy. This is also an example of ignoring details that just don't fit your narrative. Plato also described a canal that ran through the walls to the inner structure connecting rings, but no such canals are remotely evident on that photo or in the evidence of the Richat structure. The theory argues that the size of the Richat structure also matches Plato's description, which, after translation, is approximately 23 kilometers. However, since discovering the Richat structure, NASA puts the size of the structure at 45 kilometers, well larger than Plato's initial wording. Further is the dating of the death of Atlantis from 11,600 years ago, quote, precisely, that this matches the date of something by the name of the Younger Dryas. If you don't know what the Younger Dryas is, the Younger Dryas is a comet disintegrating into Earth's atmosphere, which was a climactic event which took place between 12,900 and 11,700 years ago. This event was basically a temporary return to the glacial condition on our planet, with decreased average temperatures in the northern hemisphere. It primarily affected the northern latitudes and North America more intensely. Theorists claim that an event that lasted 1,200 years precisely matched an event that was supposed to have happened in one day, 100 years after the Younger Dryas ended. So even trying to match up the times of the fall of Atlantis and this natural disaster that would have happened around this time are off by around 100 or so years. Moreover, scientists and researchers say there is no reason to think that the Younger Dryas affected the equatorial regions of the planet, and the Richat structure is at 21 degrees latitude. So really, it was in the wrong place and at the wrong time for the Younger Dryas to be significant whatsoever.
But Atlantis!
I know. It's another forced thing to fit into the story that's not entirely all that compelling. All this also ignored Plato's description that the city was wiped out by an earthquake in a single day and sank into the Atlantic. Next is the idea of the surrounding geography, that there were mountains to the north, the city was surrounded by flat plains and open to the Atlantic Ocean to the south. Yes, there are mountains to the north, but this is hardly an amazing match. Surrounded by flat plains is not much of a precise description. Surrounded by how much, what kind of geography, and the Richat is in the Sahara. So there is desert sands where there aren't mountains. They're not really plains, nor is it surrounded by them. But an even worse force fit through this is the opening to the ocean. The idea refers to a sand drift to the southwest, which is somewhere around like more to the west. But however, this is not south. it also doesn't open up to the ocean, which is to the west. The theory has to imagine that this part of the Sahara was flooded by the Atlantic 12,000 years ago. That also solves the problem of the Richat not being on an island. Perhaps it was back then, but it did not sink so much as become landlocked. So yeah, you can make something sort of fit if you're willing to make stuff up as needed. The evidence that we currently have says that the Sahara Desert is at least several million years old.
Yeah.
There's no evidence that that Western Africa was underwater thousands of years ago. And ignoring fatal problems like this is a classic feature of pseudoscience and conspiracy theory. It is also significant that there is absolutely no evidence of a city in the Richat structure from 12,000 years ago. Plato wrote about an advanced large city. Where is the archaeological evidence of the civilization built by Atlantis? Where are the remains of a city's worth of artifacts of the technology, even a shard of clay pot, anything? But there is no evidence of engineering, no walls of any kind, or any improvements to the natural structure of people living there. You simply cannot have an entire city and leave zero behind. I mean, we talked about the city of Troy. The city of Troy was buried under 7 different civilizations that existed on top of it over time, but it was still there. So if the Richat structure isn't Atlantis, what is it then? Well, scientists still have questions about the Eye of the Sahara, but 2 Canadian geologists have a working theory about its origins. And I'm going to take 2 Canadian geologists' word over anybody who dives on the internet for theories.
Really, who wouldn't?
I know, crazy time to be alive. They think that the eye's formation began more than 100 million years ago, as the supercontinent Pangaea was ripped apart by plate tectonics, and what are now Africa and South America were being torn away from one another. Molten rock would have pushed up toward the surface, but didn't make it all the way, creating a dome of rock layers like a very large pimple. This also created fault lines circling and crossing the eye. The molten rock also dissolved limestone near the center of the eye, which collapsed to form a special type of rock called breccia. A little after 100 million years ago, the eye violently erupted. That collapsed the bubble part way, and erosion did the rest of the work to create the Eye of the Sahara that we now know today. The rings are made of different types of rock that erode at different speeds, and the paler circle near the center of the eye is volcanic rock created during that explosion.
it looks totally natural. It doesn't look like, if you zoom out, you're like, whoa, that's crazy. But then you just zoom in and you're like, oh no, that's just fucking like water that did that.
And even then, the people who have gone in there, because again, they believe Atlantis lived in these natural structures. There's zero evidence that any humans ever did anything down there. There's no evidence of cities or mining or chipping away. There's nothing. It's just a giant bubble in the middle. Like, you can imagine seeing it from space, like this giant kind of bubble bubbling up from Africa, and over millions of years, it eventually collapsed on itself. And because it formed all those different rocks and they erode at different speeds, you get those rings because they're different types of rock. Mm-hmm. It's cool. But that, in essence, brings us to the end of what I will call our scientific side of the Atlantis episode, gentlemen. While there are tons of other theories out there that have less evidence than what I presented you now, but if you
like it's in the Black Sea, or it's like, in the Bermuda Triangle, or all the different things.
There's even theories where the reason that it said 9,000 years is because it was a mistranslation that followed a mistranslation. And if it was actually 900 years and then you do the math, then it fits better. And that's the kind of theories that you're really looking at when you dive into Atlantis. So if you want to know more, that's what you're in for. I would highly, again, recommend for our sources, the Atlantopedia, which was a super great kind of... It
seems like a meme, doesn't it? It just seems like an old ass meme. They're like, yeah, this is old as, like you say, now we have Batman and shit. So it's like branded, but back then, it's just Atlantis.
And another shout out to the book Meet Me in Atlantis by Mark Adams. For anybody who's interested in just the history of Atlantis, this book is just such a freaking good read. And it's an easy one. Really, really fun. But I will say, stepping away from this, if Atlantis existed, I am in the camp that it was likely the Minoan Empire, like the Isle of Crete, that was just likely translated and passed along and just got warped. And whenever Plato heard of it, he either decided, like you said, Hollywood movie magic it up a little bit, or he was told it as a story and just passed the story along. But I hope you feel a little sated now that we've done a history version of Atlantis, and you don't feel as crazy as you did in the first episode, gentlemen.
No, yeah. I mean,
you still feeling better, Jesse?
Dude, please. I love when we get knowledgeable on this show. Ooh. I have a great time.
Certainly.
Look at the Rosicrucians that I was talking about during the Green Stone episode, right? Like, jokes aside about the Green Stone, like the Rosicrucians, right? Everybody was like, yeah, they're real, dude. And then if you like go back and you read the real thing, it's like, yeah, these guys are like made up to like show a point. And like the fact that it's gotten this far that like people today believe that they were real, even though like in the primary fucking source, it's like, this is fake, yo, this is fake. You know, it just opens that door of like, when it really is harmless, when it's really not like somebody trying to make a buck, like the idea of information spreading like that just because it's a cool idea or it's just like a great story. Like, think about how many times you've retweeted an article without reading it. Just think about it. You know what I mean? Like,
you know, the last thing I think I want to leave, like, in terms of like Atlantis is just like, once you realize that Atlantis came from a book where it was already like 6th generation information being passed down, and you kind of take that at its word, it's a bit crazy. The other thing too that I didn't really touch on too much is that Plato was known to kind of write in code a lot of the time. Just kind of like mathematical code and like lessons and stuff. But that was the theorists take that to the extreme with Atlantis and think that his Atlantis story in the story of Atlantis, coded in his messages, is the real location of Atlantis. And you need to like figure out what code he's using, what crypto language he's using to try and like pass along his lesson. And that's just an even further stretch of insanity. If you ask me, this is my opinion. But as much as I love the crazy world of like crazy shit, Atlantis is one of those things that's even too far gone for me.
And just as a reminder to everyone, historical reminder, Plato was like one of Socrates' boys.
Yes.
And Socrates was killed for corrupting the youth.
Yes, he was.
Saying, oh, this dude definitely was speaking in code could very well be true. I mean, maybe he don't want to be killed for corrupting the youth. So, you know.
I mean, that's very, very, very true. And I think that's an actual like thing that people talk about. But that was great. Thank you guys so much for letting me go through our crazy Atlantis double parter. I'm so glad that Atlantis has been done. It was a really fun topic to research. Next week, we have a guest coming on the show, everybody, with a special topic that is going to be more along the lines of like Tamam Shud, I think. So
it's not the Greenstone Part 3, just so you guys, you know,
no,
you conspiracy
it is not
theorists.
Michael Reparas. He's not coming from a video game apocalypse.
I don't believe that from. I am always concerned that at some point you're gonna be like, and that is where we arrive at the old house. Now, I'll be like, oh, when that happens, I'm gonna let you know. I may have to do like a get up and walk around.
I'm gonna get you so good when it happens.
I'm very worried.
Excited,
I'm so good at this. Trust me.
I'm ready.
It's almost as if this whole thing has been a giant ruse of some kind.
Oh, now you got me curious. Hey, it is the end of August, guys. And in a couple of months, at the end of October 26th to be precise, we are going to be doing a live show out in LA.
How delightful.
Chilluminati Pod. Yeah, it's going to be such a good time. Go to Chilluminatipod.com. You can go get your tickets right now. We don't got many left.
We would love to see you. And hey, here's the truth. Honestly, real talk. You don't even have to come to the show. Just buy the tickets so we can say we sold out. And I would be like real pleased.
That would be
just for bragging rights. Like, I don't even care if you're there. Are you a rich prince from somewhere? Just buy some tickets.
Just throw some money down. What's the point of not doing it?
You're so wealthy. Why not?
You just click a button and somebody else's live change across the world who you love. Patreon.com/ChilluminatiPod. Check it out.
All right, we got a mini-sode to go do. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another exciting one. We love you, and goodbye. Anyway, me and my wife were sitting outside indulging on our porch one night, enjoying ourselves. I needed to go to the bathroom, so I stepped back inside, and after a few moments, I hear my wife go, "Holy shit, get out here." So I quickly dash back outside, and she's looking up at the sky in awe. I look up too, and there's a perfect line of dozen lights traveling across the sky.